At 90 years old, Loretta Lynn no longer wished to remain silent. She was no longer the girl in a bright floral dress standing beneath the stage lights. Now, she was an icon at the twilight of her life, looking back at a journey filled with triumphs, but also carved with wounds that never fully healed. And to tell this story, we must return to where it all began, a forgotten place called Butcher Hollow, Kentucky. The wooden shack where Loretta was born was not a home, but a decaying box surrounded by mud. Her father, a coal miner, worked himself into the ground to feed 8 children. Her mother, weary and frail, endured childbirth after childbirth. And little Loretta, before she ever learned to write, learned how to hold back her tears. In that world, men had the right to drink, shout, and strike. Women were expected only to endure. At 15, Loretta entered marriage not with a white dress, but with fear. Her husband, Doolittle Lynn, much older than her, struck her for the first time during their honeymoon. No one defended her. No one called it wrong. They simply said, "A man has the right to discipline his wife." It was her first lesson in a brutal truth in her world. Love meant submission. By 18, she had 4 children. By 20, she stood in a smoke-filled bar. Clutching a guitar, she did not sing out of dreams of fame. She sang for money, for survival, to escape the fury of her kitchen-bound life. And there, in that shabby bar, her raw, unpolished, scarred voice rang out, a voice that would ignite a legend. She didn't sing of rosy dreams. She sang of abandonment, betrayal, jealousy, and nights spent crying in silence. Songs like "Don't Come Home A-Drinkin'," Rated X, and "The Pill" weren't just titles, they were bullets fired directly at a patriarchal world. Nashville banned here. Radio stations refused to play her songs. But Loretta stood proud. With red lips and floral dresses, defying every barrier. Audiences didn't just hear a woman's pain, they heard the cry of millions who had been silenced. Loretta Lynn turned survival into art, transforming a violent kitchen into a cathedral of music. Yet behind the glory, the bruises remained. She forgave too much, stayed quiet too long, and by 90, she made a decision to name the 5 men she hated most, not from spite, but so she would not carry their shadows to the grave. The journey has begun, from a rotting shack to a bruised marriage, from tears to songs that shook a nation, and now we will face them one by one. The first man, the husband who turned love into chains. In every story about Loretta Lynn, the name Doolittle Lynn, or Do, appears as if inseparable from hers. To the world, he was the loyal husband who drove her to Nashville, the man who helped her sign her first contract, the father of 6 children. But behind closed doors, the truth was darker, a prison without bars, built with blows, insults, and silent tears. Loretta met Do when she was just 13 and married him at 15. It wasn't a fairy tale romance, it was a blind leap into marriage. On their honeymoon, he struck her for the first time. That slap was more than pain on her cheek. It planted a seed of endurance, and for 48 years, that seed grew into endless nights of sorrow. Doo's violence was not reserved for drunken nights. His jealousy was consuming, treating every glance, every smile Loretta gave to another as betrayal. Once, he shoved her to the kitchen floor simply because the eggs were cooked the wrong way. Another time, in a grocery store, he slapped her for forgetting to call him darling. To him, Loretta was not a wife, nor an artist. She was property, something to be owned, and when Loretta's star began to rise, Doo drank more, and the blows grew harsher. After every concert filled with lights and applause, she returned home to anger, then apologies, then the same cycle all over again. For decades, Loretta, the woman with sad eyes but a powerful voice, turned her suffering into music, her wounds into melodies. In one rare interview, Loretta admitted, "He didn't teach me how to love. He taught me how to endure, and from that endurance came songs that shook Nashville, Don't Come Home, A Drinkin', Fist City." They weren't just country tunes, they were battle cries from a woman chained in her own marriage. Doo once appeared on national television, clutching her hand, weeping, claiming he loved her too much to let others look at her. But Loretta knew that wasn't love. That was possession. That was pain disguised as devotion. At 90, Loretta finally admitted she hated him, not for being poor or flawed, but for turning love into shackles, marriage into hell, and for making her believe that being beaten was part of being loved. Doolittle Lynn, the first man on the list of 5 she could never forgive. To America, he was the husband of the Queen of Country. To Loretta, he was the shadow of a prison. If Doolittle Lynn was the man who turned Loretta's youth into a prison, then Conway Twitty was the dream that crumbled, a dream bathed in stage lights, only to end in the shadows of betrayal. Fans adored them as country music's golden couple, Loretta and Conway, hand in hand, smiling brightly, blending voices in hits like Louisiana Woman, Mississippi Man, and After the Fire Is Gone. On stage, they were perfect harmony, as if destined to sing together, but behind the curtain, Loretta silently wept. To her, Conway was more than a duet partner. He was hope, the hope that, after years trapped in Doo's cruelty, she might finally find a man who respected and cherished her. She believed that if Conway had not already had a family, perhaps he could have been that safe harbor. But hope shattered quickly. Loretta discovered that everything, the tours, the contracts, even promotional photos, was controlled by Conway. His name was always printed larger, hers smaller. If their schedules conflicted, her projects were buried to highlight his beat. The cruelest cut came in 1975. During a live radio interview, asked about Loretta, Conway smirked and said, "She's a lady, and I'm the man who gave that lady her second career." The words sliced through her. That night, Loretta smashed the first gold record they had ever earned together. She realized the truth. She didn't love Conway. She loved the idea of him. He didn't cherish her. He cherished the way her name lifted his higher. Loretta later said, "I never really loved Conway. I only loved the idea of who I thought he was. But he was never that man." After that interview, Loretta still smiled on stage, still sang with flawless harmony. But her eyes had changed. Behind every duet lay a hidden wound the audience could never see. Conway Twitty, the second man Loretta Lynn could never forgive, not because he struck her body, but because he stole her trust, the most fragile gift a woman could give after a lifetime of pain if Conway Twitty wounded Loretta with exploitation. Merle Haggard scarred her with humiliation, a shame she never forgot. Loretta once saw Merle as a brother. They sang together, embraced on stage, and she truly believed their bond was genuine. Merle, with his cowboy charm, seemed like a trusted colleague, a big brother in a world of country music dominated by men. But then, live on national television. That bond shattered. In front of millions, when asked about Loretta, Merle smirked and said, "I love Loretta the way you love a hen that crows on time." The studio erupted in laughter. The host chuckled. Merle beamed, proud of his so-called joke. Only Loretta sat still, her smile vanishing. She knew it wasn't humor. It was a slap in the face, broadcast to all of America. Outwardly, she appeared calm, but inside, she felt reduced to nothing, stripped of dignity. Treated not as an artist, but as a worn-out joke. Later she said, "That wasn't a joke. That was how he really saw me. And I had to sit there, pretending not to hear, while the whole country laughed at me." Merle later dismissed it as humor. But Loretta never forgot. She hated him not only for the words, but for choosing to belittle her in exchange for a cheap laugh. In country music, a world where men already held the power, his comment reinforced the stereotype that Loretta was just an old hen with no value left for a woman who had fought her whole life for respect. It was a wound that cut deep. Merle Haggard, the third man Loretta Lynn could never forgive. A man she once called brother, but who turned her into America's joke. If Merle Haggard's insult was a slap in the face, David Allan Coe was a knife in the back wielded through music itself. The very thing Loretta Lynn once believed was her sanctuary. In 1984, Loretta stood at the height of her career. She was nominated for a Grammy with Lion, Cheatin', Woman Chasin', Honky Tonkin', Whiskey Drinkin' You. Critics hailed her as a pioneer for women in country music, but just as she was reaching that peak, David Allan Coe, an outlaw singer notorious for shock tactics, struck with cruelty. He released an underground album circulated on bootleg cassette tapes across the American South. Among the tracks was one vile creation, Loretta's Love in Chains. It was grotesque, mocking her voice with violent sexual imagery, depicting her chained in a horse stall, beaten, moaning, and calling it love. The tapes spread quickly, whispered about, passed around like a dirty secret. Nashville media condemned it. But David sneered on the radio, "Serves her right for yapping about feminism. That's what mouthy old ladies get." The timing was devastating. On the eve of the biggest awards night of her career, Loretta dressed in her finest gown but heard only the filth of that song echoing in her mind. Her team stayed silent. No one defended her. Once again, she stood alone. She wanted to sue. Her lawyer advised against it. No one wanted to tangle with Coe, who thrived on scandal. So she swallowed the pain, walked on stage, and accepted her award with her heart in pieces. Later, she admitted, "I hate him not just for writing that song. I hate him because he turned my name into a weapon, used it to degrade me and call it art." David Allan Coe, the fourth man on Loretta Lynn's blacklist, a man who used music not to heal, but to humiliate and destroy. Among the men Loretta Lynn could never forgive, the name Johnny Cash is perhaps the most surprising. To the world, Johnny was the man in black. a rebel, a humanitarian, a legend to Loretta. He was once a rare source of trust in an industry stacked against women, but precisely because she trusted him, his silence cut the deepest. Loretta and Johnny shared much in common. Both had faced censorship. Both had been banned from the airwaves for singing what wasn't supposed to be sung. Both carried battles against Nashville's conservatism. To Loretta, Johnny wasn't just a colleague, he was a brother. She wept when he was inducted into the Hall of Fame, clapped her hands raw in his honor. But by the late 1990s, when Loretta was quietly blacklisted from major award shows for being too old, too outspoken about women's rights, no one came to her defense. The press was silent. Fellow artists were silent. And most painfully, Johnny was silent. In a 1999 TV interview, asked about Loretta, Johnny gave a faint smile and said, "I think everyone has a time when they need to step back." It was only a sentence, but it pierced Loretta's heart. She didn't need Johnny to make a fiery speech. She didn't need him to take on the industry. She only needed a word of support, or at the very least, respectful silence. Instead, Johnny's comment felt like a public confirmation of her expiration date. From that day on, she erased his name from her touring notes, on stage and in interviews. She left a deliberate silence where his name might have been later. She confessed, "I don't hate him for staying silent. I hate him because I believed he never would." Johnny Cash, the fifth man. And the deepest wound on Loretta Lynn's list, a betrayal not by fists or insults, but by silence. The silence of someone she once believed would always speak for her. At 90, Loretta spoke his name not to tarnish a legend, but to tell the world sometimes. What breaks a woman isn't the cruelty of enemies, but the silence of the ones she trusted most. At 90, Loretta Lynn no longer feared naming the men who turned her life into a chain of wounds. 5 names: Doolittle Lynn, Conway Twitty, Merle Haggard, David Allan Coe, Johnny Cash. Each left a scar, but together they forged the Loretta the world will never forget. She once said, "I don't regret singing. I regret staying silent too long." For over 70 years, Loretta transformed pain into lyrics, endurance into melody. Yet it wasn't until her hair had turned white that she dared to speak the truths her heart had carried. What makes her story powerful isn't bitterness. It is resilience. From a 15-year-old bride forced into marriage, from a battered wife silenced by fear, Loretta rose to become the queen of country music, a symbol not just of artistry, but of survival. Her songs were never merely ballads. They were records of survival, roars against silence. The Pill was not just a tune, it was a manifesto for women's reproductive freedom. Don't come home. A Drinkin' wasn't just catchy country, it was a scream against domestic violence. By naming those 5 men, Loretta didn't seek pity. She reclaimed her truth for herself and for every woman who endured similar pain. She reminded us that behind every legend lies a human being, bruised and bleeding, and that true strength doesn't come from hiding the wounds, but from daring to reveal them. Loretta Lynn's legacy isn't only in her Grammys, her timeless hits, or her crown as the Queen of Country. It lies in how she carved a path for women to raise their voices. She proved that authentic art never avoids truth, no matter how painful, and when her voice fell silent, what lingered was this lesson. Women are not born merely to be loved, they are born to survive. And if survival meant singing with blood and tears, Loretta Lynn did just that. Until her very last breath,